What pushes a woman who builds empires, a titan of industry whose whisper can send shockwaves through Wall Street, to shatter in the opulent grandeur of New York's most exclusive restaurant? It isn't a hostile takeover or a market collapse. It is a piece of jewelry, a complex celestial locket of tarnished silver and sapphire, worn by a young waitress trying to keep her head above water. This is not merely a tale of the chasm between the 1% and the rest of the world. It is a story of a promise broken 30 years ago, a betrayal so profound it rewrote a family's history, and a single intricate object that holds the power to mend a legacy or obliterate it for good. This is the story of Genevieve Sterling, and the waitress who held the key, not just to a fortune, but to a truth buried under decades of grief and lies. Genevieve Sterling, at 83, was a monument of controlled elegance and ruthless precision. She commanded Sterling Industries, a global behemoth of technology and finance, with the same unyielding fortitude she had at 50. Her existence was a curated tapestry of boardrooms that smelled of lemon polish and ambition, Gulfstream jets sanitized to surgical standards, and hushed negotiations with men who controlled the destinies of nations. But once a year, on the frigid anniversary of the day her world had fractured, she would break protocol. She would dine alone at Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive its phone number was an unlisted secret whispered among the city's elite. It wasn't the Michelin-starred cuisine she came for, though it was flawless. It was a pilgrimage to a ghost. This was the place where she and her late husband, Arthur, had celebrated the patent that launched their empire. Back then, they were two brilliant minds fueled by coffee and a shared dream in a dusty workshop. Now the workshop was a sprawling corporate campus, and Arthur was a cherished memory, gone for 15 years. Aurelia was their temple, and sitting at their customary table overlooking the park, Genevieve allowed the crushing weight of her present to be replaced by the sharper, more immediate pain of her past. She ran a perfectly manicured finger around the rim of her crystal water goblet, her mind replaying Arthur's infectious laugh, the way he would diagram a new invention on a napkin. "May I offer you more water, madam?" Genevieve was pulled from her reverie. A young woman, no older than her mid-20s, stood beside the table, a silver pitcher in hand. She had a face defined by a quiet intelligence that seemed at odds with her exhaustion. Her dark hair was coiled in a neat but simple bun, and her black uniform, though immaculate, was subtly frayed at the cuffs. Genevieve, a woman who missed nothing, noted the faint tremor in the waitress's hand, the telltale sign of a double shift, the physical toll of a life lived on the knife's edge of solvency. "Yes, thank you," Genevieve murmured, her voice softer than any of her executives had ever heard it. As the waitress leaned forward, the soft, strategic lighting of Aurelia caught something resting against her collarbone. A glint of silver, a flash of deep blue. It was a necklace, tucked partially into the neckline of her uniform. It was no simple charm. It was an intricate, multi-layered disc of silver, like a miniature astrolabe, with tiny interlocking rings and a single cabochon sapphire at its heart, glowing like a distant star. Genevieve's breath seized in her chest. Her hand, adorned with the legendary sterling diamond, flew to her own throat, a reflexive gesture to a space that had been empty for 3 decades. It couldn't be. The design was too specific, the craftsmanship too unique. It was impossible. There was only one of its kind in the entire world. Arthur, a master of micromechanics and horology, had spent over a year crafting it himself. He called it the Celestial Heart. The necklace," Genevieve stammered, the words a raw, broken whisper. The opulent dining room around her began to blur, the gentle hum of conversation and the clink of silverware fading into a dull, roaring static in her ears. The waitress straightened up, a look of polite concern on her face. Her hand went to the locket, a protective, instinctual movement. "Oh, this. I'm so sorry. Is it against the dress code? I can put it away." "No," Genevieve breathed, her voice cracking under the weight of an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Her eyes, usually the sharp, analytical tools of a corporate predator, were suddenly clouded with a gathering storm. She leaned forward, her entire being focused on the object. She could see the unique patina of age on the silver, a tiny familiar scratch near the clasp that she herself had made, catching it on a desk corner. "Where did you get that?" The question was not a polite inquiry. It was a primal demand, stripped of all her legendary composure, raw with a desperation that startled them both. The waitress, whose name tag read Maya, looked taken aback, a flicker of fear in her intelligent eyes at the sudden, unnerving intensity of the elegant old woman. It, it was my mother's," Maya replied, her voice soft but steady. "She told me it was the only thing she had left of her family." "Your mother?" Genevieve's mind was a maelstrom. Clara, her brilliant, beautiful, lost daughter. The argument, the scent of rain on the night she left, the subsequent years of agonizing silence. It all came crashing down on her, with the force of a physical blow. Genevieve pushed herself to her feet, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. The impenetrable fortress she had built around her heart, fortified over decades of loss and ruthless success, was turning to dust. She reached a trembling hand across the table, not to take the necklace, but as if to beseech it, to plead with the ghost it represented. "Please," Genevieve whispered, and the sound was so fractured, so utterly broken, it seemed to suck the air from the space around them. "I must know. What was your mother's name?" Maya hesitated, her brow furrowed with genuine concern for the woman who was visibly disintegrating before her. "Ma'am, are you feeling all right? Should I call someone?" "Her name!" Genevieve's voice tore through the refined atmosphere of the restaurant, causing heads at nearby tables to turn. A single tear, hot and heavy, broke free and traced a devastating path through the fine powder on her cheek. Then another, and another. Genevieve Sterling, the queen of a global empire, stood in the center of Aurelia and began to weep, a silent, soul-shattering breakdown that convulsed her entire frame. Stunned, overwhelmed, and completely terrified, Maya could only whisper the name that had been both her comfort and her mystery her entire life. Her name was Clara, Clara Abbott. Abbott, the name of the man she ran away with, the artist. Genevieve's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a cry of pure, unadulterated agony. After 30 years of dead ends, of private detectives returning with empty hands, of nights spent staring into the hollow silence of her daughter's perfectly preserved room. Here was the answer. In the most exclusive restaurant in New York, hanging around the neck of an exhausted waitress, her granddaughter. The journey to Genevieve Sterling's palatial Fifth Avenue penthouse was a study in surreal silence. Maya, having been whisked away from her shift by a bewildered restaurant manager, acting on Genevieve's frantic instructions, sat on the edge of a cream leather seat in a custom Maybach. The car was so quiet, so insulated from the city, it felt like a moving vault. Beside her, Genevieve was a statue of contained sorrow, her eyes red-rimmed but now dry, fixed on the glittering cityscape as if she were seeing a foreign land. They ascended in a private elevator that opened directly into an apartment that was less a home and more a private museum. Sprawling rooms with impossibly high ceilings, walls adorned with works by Rothko and de Kooning, and windows that offered a god's-eye view of Central Park. A man in a discreet suit, Genevieve's head of security and chief of staff, Mr. Harrison, greeted them with a face of perfect, professional calm that barely masked his alarm at his employer's state. "Mrs. Sterling, is everything in order?" he asked, his voice a low baritone. "Everything has changed, Harrison," Genevieve said, her voice weighted with a lifetime of meaning. "Please see that we are not disturbed, and bring tea to the study, for two." The study was Arthur's domain, preserved exactly as he had left it 15 years ago. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with books on physics, engineering, and art. On a large mahogany desk sat intricate clockwork models and half-finished schematics. Above the marble fireplace hung a portrait, not of a stiff patriarch, but of a man with kind, laughing eyes and a blueprint in his hands. Arthur. Genevieve sank into a worn leather armchair, the familiar scent of old paper and machine oil seeming to give her strength. "Please sit," she gestured to Maya, who chose a small, uncomfortable-looking chair opposite her, as if poised for flight. "Mrs. Sterling, ma'am, I don't understand, Maya began, her voice a nervous tremor. That necklace it's my most precious possession. Genevieve took a long, shuddering breath. That necklace, she started, her gaze locked on the silver object, is named the Celestial Heart. My husband, Arthur, the man in the portrait, he made it for our daughter, Clara. There is only one. He built a universe into it. It's not just a locket, it's a puzzle. She leaned forward slightly. Your mother, did she ever show you how it opens? Maya's hand instinctively covered the locket. She told me it was locked. She said the key was a memory she'd lost. She tried to open it sometimes, but she never could. I've tried too. I've spent hours studying the markings, the way the rings turn. It feels like there's a sequence, but I could never figure it out. Here it was, a flicker of something beyond mere inheritance. The girl had her mother's curiosity, Arthur's analytical mind. The key is not a memory, my dear, Genevieve said softly. It is a date, the day she was born. Month, day, year. 8 digits. Each ring on the locket corresponds to a number. You turn them to the correct sequence, and it will open. Maya's eyes widened. She had never known her mother's exact birthday. Clara had always been vague, claiming she didn't like to celebrate it. Genevieve recited the date, a string of numbers seared into her memory. With trembling fingers, Maya held the locket and began to turn the delicate, interlocking silver rings, each clicking softly into place. After the last digit, there was a faint, almost inaudible whirring sound. The face of the locket split down the middle, unfolding like the petals of a mechanical flower. Inside it was a marvel. On one side, protected by a crystal lens, was a miniature, hand-painted photograph of a young Genevieve and Arthur, vibrant and in love. On the other side was not an inscription, but a complex series of gears and levers, like the inside of a priceless watch. And nestled within that clockwork was a tiny, folded piece of paper. Maya carefully extracted it with the tip of her fingernail and unfolded it. It was a bearer bond for an astonishing sum of money, issued by a private Swiss bank. And beneath it, engraved into the silver in Arthur's minute, precise script, were 2 lines. For my Polaris, a new start. The password is the name of the first star we ever wished upon. Tears began to stream down Genevieve's face once more. Polaris, that was his name for her. His guiding star, she whispered. He always worried about her. So impulsive, so brilliant. He wanted to make sure she would always have a way to be safe. A way home. She gathered herself, taking a deep breath to steel her spine. 30 years ago, she began, the story pouring out of her, a torrent of pain held back for a lifetime. Clara was their world, a whirlwind of artistic talent and rebellious spirit who chafed against the rigid structures of their life. Then she met a man, a struggling painter named Mark Abbott. I disapproved, Genevieve confessed, the shame a bitter taste in her mouth. He had no ambition, no prospects. I saw him as a threat to the future I had planned for her. I feared for her safety, for her stability. The final argument had been catastrophic. Vicious words hurled like stones. You value your balance sheets more than my heart, Clara had screamed. You don't know love, you only know assets. She was 23, Genevieve whispered, her voice a ghost. She packed a small bag. I was so certain she'd be back in a week once the money ran out. But she never called. She never wrote. She simply vanished. She looked at Maya, her eyes pleading for an absolution she didn't deserve. We spent millions searching. We hired the best investigators in the world. It was as if she had stepped off the face of the planet. Arthur died believing she hated us. Maya listened, her own life story being violently rewritten with every sentence. Her mother, Clara, had raised her in a series of small, rented apartments, always one step ahead of eviction. She had been a loving, fiercely protective, but deeply melancholic woman who worked as a freelance graphic designer, her talent constantly hampered by her lack of connections. She spoke of the past in hushed, vague terms. Maya's father, she'd said, had died in an accident before she was born. Her own parents, she claimed, had disowned her for her choice of husband. My mother told me her parents cut her off completely, Maya said softly. the lie she'd believed her entire life now crumbling around her. She said she tried to reach out, but they never wanted to see her again. After my father died, she said she was completely alone. The two women sat in the gilded silence, separated by a chasm of 30 years, bridged only by a mechanical locket in a universe of pain. In the span of a few hours, a waitress had found her history, and a billionaire had found that her lost child had lived and died in the shadows of the very city she ruled, leaving behind a granddaughter she never knew existed. "You have Arthur's hands," Genevieve said finally, a sad, tender smile touching her lips. "The same long, capable fingers." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Maya, do you have any children?" The question broke through Maya's shock. A genuine, unguarded warmth illuminated her face, chasing away the exhaustion. "Yes, I have a son. His name is Ethan. He's 5. A great-grandson." The words were a healing balm on Genevieve's scarred soul, a new, vibrant branch on a family tree she had thought was severed forever. "I must meet him," Genevieve said, her voice thick with unshed emotion. "Maya, I want to give you everything. Everything your mother was denied. Everything that is yours by right of blood." But before the weight of that offer could even settle, the study doors swung open with a dramatic flourish. A man in a flawlessly tailored suit stood in the doorway. He had Genevieve's sharp cheekbones but Arthur's cool, calculating eyes. Beside him, a woman dripped in jewels, her expression a mask of practiced disdain. It was Lawrence Sterling, Genevieve's nephew and the acting CEO of Sterling Industries, and his wife, Victoria. "Aunt Genevieve," Lawrence said, his voice a silken blade of suspicion as his eyes raked over Maya, taking in her simple uniform and stunned expression. "Harrison said you brought a guest home. An unusual one at that. To what do we owe the intrusion?" Lawrence and Victoria Sterling swept into the study like a pair of elegantly dressed predators. Lawrence, the son of Genevieve's late brother, had been groomed since childhood to be the heir apparent. He possessed Arthur's intelligence but none of his warmth, and Genevieve's ambition but none of her sentiment. He saw the world not as a place of wonder, but as a chessboard to be dominated. Victoria, his wife, was a creature of calculated social grace, her value tied to the perfection of her appearance and the ruthlessness of her ambition. Their eyes landed on Maya, and the judgment was instantaneous and absolute. They saw not a person, but a problem. They saw her inexpensive shoes on a priceless Aubusson rug, her server's uniform in a room that had hosted statesmen. Their gazes flickered to the open locket, then to Genevieve's tear-streaked face, and their expressions hardened from curiosity to alarm. "Genevieve, what is the meaning of this?" Lawrence demanded, his tone that of a CEO handling a security breach. "Who is this woman?" Victoria glided further into the room, her eyes narrowing as she processed the scene. "My goodness, you look utterly distressed, darling," she cooed, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Has this person been bothering you? Shall I have security escort her out?" Genevieve drew herself up, the formidable matriarch reasserting control. The moment of vulnerability was over. "Lawrence, Victoria, this is Maya. She is Clara's daughter." The declaration detonated in the silent room. Lawrence's face cycled through disbelief, then derision, before settling into a mask of cold, hard cynicism. Victoria let out a short, sharp laugh, like the crack of a whip. "Clara's daughter? Genevieve, you can't be serious," Lawrence scoffed. "Clara ran off 30 years ago without a trace. This is preposterous. Some sort of pathetic grift." "It is not a grift," Genevieve said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "She is wearing the celestial heart, the locket Arthur made for Clara." Victoria drifted closer, affecting a show of examining the necklace. "A piece of jewelry, darling," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "That is hardly irrefutable proof. Trinkets are lost, stolen, even replicated by clever forgers. This woman is an opportunist, plain and simple. She likely heard some rumor and concocted this theatrical performance to get her hands on the sterling fortune." Maya, who had been frozen in her chair, finally found her voice. The shock was receding, replaced by a spark of hot indignation. She stood, her posture straight, her chin high. "I haven't asked for anything. I was at my job. Your aunt is the one who—" Be quiet, Lawrence snapped, cutting her off with an imperious gesture, as if swatting away a fly. He turned his full attention back to Genevieve. "And I implore you to think rationally. You are emotional. A waitress appears out of nowhere with a sob story and a prop, and you're ready to rewrite history? How incredibly convenient. How transparently fraudulent." "This is not about convenience, Lawrence. This is about my granddaughter," Genevieve retorted, her voice trembling with rage. "This is about my blood." "Your alleged granddaughter," Victoria corrected smoothly. "A claim of this magnitude requires proof of an equal magnitude, not a sentimental trinket in a well-rehearsed story." The atmosphere in the room had soured completely. The study, a place of memory and potential reunion, had become a courtroom, and Maya was the one on trial. She felt her cheeks burn with a humiliation so intense it felt like a physical heat. These people were looking through her, seeing not a person, but a threat to their inheritance. "I don't want your money," Maya said, her voice clear and strong, defying the frantic hammering in her chest. "An hour ago, I didn't know any of you existed. All I knew was that my mother was gone, and that she was sad and alone." She looked at Genevieve, her expression softening with an empathy that the other two couldn't comprehend. "And I think I'm finally beginning to understand why." The raw, uncalculated emotion in Maya's voice only seemed to cement Lawrence's conviction. He saw it as a performance, a tactic in a high-stakes con. "How touching," he sneered. "A real-life fairy tale." "Well, in the real world, we don't operate on fairy tales. We operate on facts, on irrefutable data." He leveled a cold, calculating gaze at Maya, then at his aunt. "There is only one way to resolve this, a DNA test." Victoria nodded emphatically. "Precisely. Clinical, scientific, undeniable. Our attorneys will arrange everything with the most secure lab in the country. There will be no room for error and no room for fraud." The word fraud was aimed at Maya like a projectile. She flinched. The evening had devolved from baffling to nightmarish. She thought of her son, Ethan. The last thing she wanted was to drag him into this toxic nest of vipers. Genevieve looked at Maya, her expression a mixture of profound apology and grim determination. "They are right, Maya. Not because I have any doubt in my heart. I know who you are. But to silence them. To make it official, undeniable. For your sake and for your son's." Maya felt cornered. Refusing the test would be an admission of guilt in their eyes. Agreeing meant stepping deeper into their poisonous world. She thought of her cramped apartment, her mountain of student debt from a community college degree she barely had time to use, the gnawing anxiety that was her constant companion. Then she thought of Ethan, and the world of possibilities this could open for him. Good schools, proper health care, a future free from the crushing weight of poverty she knew so well. But at what cost? Taking a deep, steadying breath, she met Lawrence's icy stare head-on. "Fine," she said, her voice firm. "Do it. Run your test. You'll get your proof." Lawrence gave a curt, triumphant nod. "Excellent. Our legal team will be in touch to arrange the sample collection tomorrow." He then turned to his aunt, his voice laced with authority. "And until those results are in, you will not give this woman a single dime. This is, for all intents and purposes, a pending legal matter. She is a claimant, not family. She will stay here, in this house, as my guest," Genevieve declared, her own authority ringing through the room like a steel bell. A flash of fury crossed Lawrence's face before he masked it with a thin smile. "As you wish, Aunt. But don't say we didn't warn you when this all blows up in your face." With a final, withering glare at Maya, Lawrence and Victoria turned and exited the study, their victory palpable. The tentative warmth of reunion had been extinguished, replaced by the chilling reality of the battle to come. Maya was not just discovering a family, she had been conscripted into a war. The following week was a surreal exercise in psychological warfare. Maya and 5-year-old Ethan were installed in a guest suite that was larger and more opulent than their entire apartment building. For Ethan, it was a magical kingdom. He was mesmerized by the floor-to-ceiling aquarium in the main hall, played hide-and-seek in the manicured rooftop garden, and quickly charmed the stern-faced Mr. Harrison. For Maya, however, the penthouse was a beautiful, suffocating prison. Lawrence and Victoria had made it clear to the staff that she was to be treated with polite suspicion. She was a guest who was not allowed to leave the premises without Harrison's escort, a potential heir who was also a potential criminal. Victoria, in particular, took a cruel pleasure in her daily psychological jabs, making comments about Maya's simple clothes or Ethan's boisterous energy, all delivered with a smile as sharp as broken glass. Genevieve, meanwhile, poured all her frustrated energy into getting to know the great-grandson she never knew she had. She read him stories, showed him Arthur's clockwork models, and in the boy's bright, curious eyes, she saw echoes of her lost daughter and her brilliant husband. A fragile, tentative bond began to form between Maya and Genevieve as well, forged in the shared telling of stories about Clara. "Your mother could find the mathematical perfection in anything," Genevieve recalled one afternoon, showing Maya Clara's old sketchbooks, which were filled not with portraits, but with intricate drawings of natural fractals, the spiral of a seashell, the branching of a frost pattern on a window pane. Arthur used to say she had a poet's soul and an engineer's eye. I tried to force her into finance. I didn't understand that I was trying to cage a storm. The regret in her voice was a physical presence in the room. But Lawrence was not sitting idle. He saw Genevieve's growing affection for Maya as a direct threat to his power. "She's working on her, Victoria," he seethed one night in their own wing of the penthouse. "Playing the part of the meek, grateful orphan. Genevieve is old, she's grieving. She's the perfect mark." "The DNA test is a formality," Victoria said, applying a diamond-infused face cream. "Even if it proves she's Clara's bastard, it doesn't prove her character. We need to discredit her so thoroughly that even if Genevieve accepts her, the board of directors never will. The Sterling legacy cannot be handed over to some waitress with a dubious past." Lawrence made a call. He hired a man named Silas Croft, a corporate investigator known for his lack of scruples and his talent for manufacturing dirt where none existed. Croft's initial background check on Maya Reed came up disappointingly clean. She was poor, but she was honest. Hard-working, no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. But Croft was persistent. He discovered that years ago, Maya had been forced to drop out of a prestigious university's historical archives program after her mother fell ill. The reason cited was financial hardship, but Croft saw an opportunity. He bribed a disgruntled administrative clerk from the university to fabricate a story. The new narrative was that Maya had been caught selling rare documents from the university's special collections on the black market and was quietly expelled to avoid a scandal. It was a complete fabrication, but it was plausible enough to be devastating. It painted Maya not as a devoted daughter, but as a thief and a fraud. While this trap was being set, Maya was facing a different kind of challenge. Genevieve, wanting to prepare for the inevitable, had asked the head of the Sterling Foundation's archival department to meet with Maya. His name was David Chen, a meticulous, no-nonsense man in his late 40s who had been a personal protege of Arthur Sterling. He revered Arthur's memory and was fiercely protective of his legacy. David treated Maya with professional skepticism. "Mrs. Sterling has asked me to brief you on the Foundation's charter," he began, his tone dry and clinical. "Should your claim be verified, you would eventually hold a significant position on the board. It is a responsibility that requires a deep understanding of finance, philanthropy, and, most importantly, discretion." He looked at her as if she were an unqualified intern applying for a job she couldn't possibly handle. The meeting was frustrating and demoralizing for Maya. David spoke in a language of trusts and endowments that she didn't understand. She felt small and hopelessly out of her depth. Finally, unable to take any more, she stopped him. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I understand you see me as a problem, a complication. But before I was a waitress, I was a student. My field was historical document analysis. I know about preservation, about provenance, about research." To prove her point, she took out the celestial heart, which she now wore constantly. "My mother couldn't open this. I couldn't either, not until Mrs. Sterling told me the key. But I spent years studying it, not just as a piece of jewelry, but as an artifact." She pointed to the edge of one of the silver rings. "There," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "There's a maker's mark, but it's not my great-grandfather's. It's almost invisible to the naked eye. And here, she indicated a series of nearly microscopic engravings on the inside of the clasp. These look like random scratches, but they're not. They're symbols. I thought they might be a form of shorthand or a cipher. David Chen, the meticulous archivist, leaned forward. His professional curiosity piqued for the first time. He took a jeweler's loupe from his pocket and examined the marks. His skeptical demeanor began to crack, replaced by a look of intense concentration, and then dawning respect. Maya wasn't just a claimant, she had an eye. She had the instincts of a researcher. She saw details others missed. "Remarkable," he murmured, looking up at her, really seeing her for the first time. "I've handled dozens of Mr. Sterling's personal items. I've never seen this maker's mark before. And these engravings, you're right, they're not random." For the first time since entering the penthouse, Maya felt a spark of her old self, the competent, intelligent student she had been forced to leave behind. She had found a potential ally, not in a family member, but in a guardian of her great-grandfather's legacy, a man who, like her, valued truth and evidence above all else. The day the DNA results were scheduled to be delivered, the penthouse felt like a pressurized cabin. Genevieve had summoned everyone to Arthur's study. She sat in her husband's leather armchair, a queen holding court. Maya and a blissfully unaware Ethan sat on a sofa to her right. Lawrence and Victoria positioned themselves opposite, a united front of cold hostility. The family's chief legal counsel, a stoic man named Abernathy, arrived carrying a single sealed envelope. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "I have the certified results from the genetic testing facility," he announced, breaking the seal. He read the document, his face impassive. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, he looked directly at Genevieve. "The analysis confirms a 99.97% probability of a grandmaternal relationship between Genevieve Sterling and Maya Reed," he stated. "She is, without any scientific doubt, the daughter of the late Clara Sterling." A choked sob escaped Genevieve's lips. She reached for Maya's hand, her eyes shining with tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "I knew it," she whispered. "My girl, my granddaughter." Maya felt a tidal wave of relief and vindication. She hugged Ethan tightly, her own tears blurring her vision. But the moment was fleeting. "Well," Victoria said, her voice slicing through the emotion like ice, "that settles the matter of biology, but it does not settle the matter of character." She stood and placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the mahogany desk. "While we were all waiting for this touching confirmation, Lawrence and I felt it was our fiduciary duty to the Sterling Corporation to perform a thorough background check, to understand exactly who we might be welcoming into the fold." Genevieve's smile vanished. "Victoria, this is not the time." "On the contrary," Lawrence said, rising to stand beside his wife, "it is precisely the time, before you make a catastrophic error in judgment." He opened the folder. "We hired an investigator. What he found was illuminating. It seems our dear Maya has a history of dishonesty." He pulled out a document. "This is a sworn statement from a former registrar at the university Maya briefly attended. It seems she wasn't forced to drop out due to financial hardship. She was expelled for stealing and attempting to sell rare historical documents from the school's archives." The accusation was so monstrous, so far from the truth, that Maya could only stare in stunned silence. "That's a lie," she finally gasped, finding her voice and jumping to her feet. "I left to take care of my mother. She was sick." "A convenient story," Victoria purred, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "But this affidavit tells a different one. A story of a young woman with expensive tastes and a talent for deception. It seems a propensity for theft runs in her blood." The poison in her words was aimed directly at the memory of Clara. Genevieve flinched as if struck. She looked from Lawrence and Victoria's smug, triumphant faces to Maya's panicked, desperate one. A seed of doubt, tiny and venomous, was planted. She had been so blinded by hope, so desperate for this reunion. Had she been a fool? Her world was one of lies and betrayals. People had tried to defraud her for far less than the Sterling Empire. "Maya," Genevieve asked, and the faltering in her voice was the cruelest blow of all, Is any of this true? The question shattered Maya's heart into a million pieces. To have come this far, to have the truth of her blood confirmed, only to be disbelieved by the one person who mattered. Tears of hurt, fury, and utter despair streamed down her face. "You believe them?" she whispered, her voice choked with anguish. She looked at Genevieve's conflicted face and saw that the doubt was taking root. The joy was gone, replaced by suspicion. Lawrence and Victoria had won, but before Maya could completely shatter, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "The affidavit is a forgery." All heads turned. David Chen stood in the doorway of the study, which he had entered unnoticed. In his hand he held a tablet. "What is the meaning of this intrusion, Chen?" Lawrence snarled. "This is a private family matter." "On the contrary," David replied, walking calmly into the room. "This pertains directly to the legacy of Arthur Sterling, which is my business. After Miss Reed pointed out the anomalies on the celestial heart, I began my own investigation." He looked directly at Genevieve. Arthur was a genius, but he was also a pragmatist. He was deeply worried about Clara. He knew she was vulnerable. He continued, his voice steady and clear. "The maker's mark on the locket does not belong to a jeweler. It is the registered trademark of a small, highly discreet Swiss security firm that specializes in encrypted hardware. And the engravings on the clasp, they aren't a cipher. They are a biometric access key." He turned to Lawrence, his eyes cold. Arthur Sterling didn't just give his daughter a bearer bond. That was a decoy. He established a numbered trust for her, an account so secure it was practically off the grid. It could only be accessed by two things: the unique resonance frequency of the locket's internal mechanism and a voice print password. The password was Alcyone, the brightest star in the Pleiades cluster, the first one he taught Clara to identify. David swiped on his tablet, and a series of financial statements appeared on the large screen behind the desk. The account was untouched for years. Then 30 years ago, 2 weeks after Clara disappeared, the voice password was changed, and over the next 3 decades, the account was systematically drained. Millions of dollars funneled through a series of offshore shell corporations. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. "It took some work, but we traced the ultimate beneficiary of those shell corporations." He looked directly at Lawrence, his voice dropping like the fall of a guillotine. "They all lead back to you." The air left the room. Lawrence's face went from crimson rage to a pasty, bloodless white. "It was you," Genevieve whispered, the realization dawning with horrific clarity. "Clara called here, didn't she? She tried to come home. She was a mess." Lawrence finally exploded, his composure shattering completely. "She called, yes, crying, hysterical. Her painter boyfriend had just died. She was pregnant and penniless. She was a liability. I was protecting this family, protecting you." "Protecting us?" Genevieve's voice rose to a terrifying roar, the sound of a lioness defending her young. "You turned my child away. You let her believe we had abandoned her. You let her die alone while you stole the money her father had left to protect her. You let us grieve for 30 years. The truth was finally out, uglier and more brutal than any lie. The confrontation wasn't about a waitress's character anymore. It was about a nephew's monstrous, decades-long betrayal. It was about theft, cruelty, and a secret that had festered at the heart of the Sterling family, poisoning everything it touched. In that moment, Maya was no longer the one on trial. Justice, 30 years delayed, had finally arrived. The fallout was not a storm, it was a nuclear winter. Genevieve Sterling, galvanized by a rage so pure and cold it was terrifying to behold, acted with surgical precision. Lawrence and Victoria were not merely asked to leave, they were expelled. Security escorted them from the building with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Mr. Abernathy was instructed to begin legal proceedings immediately, not just to formally disinherit Lawrence, but to pursue criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. The empire Lawrence had spent his life scheming to control was wrested from his grasp in a single, brutal afternoon. The days that followed were not filled with celebration, but with a profound and heavy quiet. The truth had been liberating, but it had also laid bare the depth of the family's wounds. Genevieve seemed to age a decade overnight. the weight of her son's betrayal and her daughter's tragic, lonely end settling deep into her bones. It was Maya who bridged the silence. One evening she found Genevieve in the study, staring blankly at Arthur's portrait. Maya didn't say a word. She simply sat with her, and for the first time she began to talk about her mother, not the myth of Clara Sterling, but the woman she knew. She talked about Clara's fierce, protective love, her quiet sadness, her quirky sense of humor, the way she would hum off-key while she worked. She painted a picture of a life that was difficult and impoverished, but not without moments of joy and beauty. "She would have been so proud of you," Genevieve said, her voice thick with tears. "You have her strength, but you have Arthur's resolve. It is a formidable combination." This marked the true beginning of their healing. The process was slow and deliberate. It was not about Maya learning to be a billionaire. It was about two strangers learning to be a family. Genevieve officially named Maya as her sole heir and successor, but she insisted that the transition be a gradual one. "This world, it can be a viper's nest," Genevieve told her. "You cannot learn to navigate it overnight. I will teach you. Arthur's legacy deserves a steward, not just an owner." David Chen became an indispensable part of this new chapter. His initial skepticism had transformed into a fierce, protective loyalty. He became Maya's mentor, spending hours each day walking her through the complexities of the Sterling Foundation, the intricacies of the corporate structure, and the weight of the responsibility she was inheriting. He was patient and methodical, treating her not as an heiress, but as a highly intelligent student with a steep learning curve. A deep professional respect grew between them, a partnership built on a shared reverence for Arthur's vision and a desire to see it flourish. Maya, in turn, began to carve out her own space within the Sterling Empire. She had no interest in hostile takeovers or market speculation. Instead, she was drawn to the foundation. With David's guidance, she began to review the archives, rediscovering her passion for history. She found letters and journals from Arthur that spoke of his dreams not just for technology, but for society. 6 months after the revelation, Maya presented a proposal to Genevieve and the Foundation's board. She wanted to establish a new wing of the Foundation, the Clara Sterling Abbott Initiative. Its purpose would be to provide grants and support for single parents pursuing higher education and careers in the arts and sciences, a lifeline her mother never had. Genevieve listened to the presentation, her eyes filled with a pride so profound it was painful. In Maya, she saw not only her daughter's compassionate spirit, but also Arthur's practical genius for building something meaningful and lasting. The initiative was approved unanimously. Life in the penthouse transformed. The sterile, museum-like silence was replaced by the sounds of Ethan's laughter echoing down the halls. Maya enrolled in courses at Columbia to finish the degree she had abandoned years ago, bringing her textbooks to the study to work alongside Genevieve. The formidable titan of industry found a new, softer purpose in being a grandmother and great-grandmother, teaching Ethan chess and telling him stories about the brilliant inventor who had built clockwork marvels. One evening, a year after that fateful night at Aurelia, Genevieve found Maya standing by the vast windows overlooking the park, the celestial heart resting against her collarbone. "Your great-grandfather made that to ensure his daughter would always have a path home," Genevieve said softly, coming to stand beside her. "She never found her way back, but you did." She gently touched the locket. "The past does not define us, Maya, but we must honor it. What Lawrence did, what I failed to do, those things happened, but the future is a story that is not yet written. And for the first time in a very long time, I am looking forward to reading the next chapter." Maya reached up and her fingers closed over Genevieve's on the locket. Its cool metal was a comforting weight, a tangible link to a history she now understood. It was no longer a symbol of loss, but a beacon of resilience. The inheritance wasn't the fortune or the penthouse or the power. It was the second chance. It was the family, forged in fire and grief, that had finally found its way back to each other, guided by the unwavering light of a distant sapphire star.